Last time at Snowwhite.
Mirror, am I pretty?
No, that would be Snow White.
Impossible! Hunter! Kill the girl!
I don't wanna.
Oh, a cottage!
Oh, I'm sleepy.
Hee! Tiny man!
And now the shocking conclusion of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Dwarves, the staple of fantasy, so much that our beloved, gruff, stout grandpas are seen by the younger generation as stale and boring. Well, you either lack imagination or are misinformed, my friend. Be prepared to walk the fairy roads and meet the many dwarfs that have been spawned by the scribes of fantasy.
Yes, 7 dwarfs. She was surrounded by the inhabitants of the living space she was burgled into. But in the end, the dwarfs decided to let her work for her keep instead of kicking her out. She cleaned the house as the magical dwarfs did their dwarf things, protecting the mountains and stuff. The dwarfs learned about her plight and that of her stepmother, and thus ordered her not to let any strangers in or accept gifts. The queen, however, had learned about the survival of her dear stepdaughter. She disguised herself and visited the hills where Snow White was, first in secret, as she planned to just stab the girl. But the dwarf's magic protected her and would not allow anyone with hostile intent to approach her. She, however, learned that the young woman could take gifts gifted to her, and when she offered a hairpiece that Snow White put into her hair, the girl fell down dead. The queen, however, learned later that the dwarfs were able to remove the hairpiece out of Snow White's hair, and thus saving her. The queen later returned, disguised as a clothing saleswoman, offering the girl a corset. And as the queen got permission to help Snow White to help put the thing on, the queen pulled until the girl could not breathe and went back to the castle to once again learn that the dwarfs were able to cut open the corset, saving Snow White's life once again. It was a given that the dwarfs didn't trust each other to protect the princess, and thus not even the dwarfs were allowed to touch her. When the queen learned that, she devised a devilish plan. Disguised as an elderly woman, she drenched one side of an apple with poison, turning half of the apple red. Snow White, however, smarted up a little and refused the gift, even from an old poor woman. The poor woman suggested that if she was afraid of poison, they could share the apple. The queen cut the fruit in half and took a bite from the green part, and knowing it was safe to eat, the princess took a big bite from the red part, and as she swallowed it, she dropped dead. When the dwarfs returned, the queen was long gone, and they found the princess lifeless on the ground. They examined her clothes, but could not find anything on her. Distraught of the loss of innocence and beauty, the dwarfs, without touching her skin, put the girl into a crystal coffin, and as long as she remained within their realm, her body would not decay. The queen went back to her room to console her magical mirror, and once again he answered, "Within the realm of the 7 dwarfs behind the 7 mountains, a woman sleeps, magical kept within a crystal bed. My queen, although thou art quite fair, Snow White remains more fairer, even in death. Enraged, the queen broke the mirror, and her tantrum was even noticed by the king, who had heard the name of his daughter quite a few times. And, well, he wondered why. The queen composed herself and told him that she wasn't fully honest to her husband, that she had a fight with his daughter at the day that Snow White went missing, and though her youth and naivete, the girl took something the queen said as a threat. Still, she was sure that their child would return to them eventually. Then she started to sob and told her husband that she just heard the news of their daughter's demise, and that her corpse was openly displayed within the dwarven realm. And that is not fair, isn't it? Their adored daughter deserved a burial in their own country, preferably next to the previous queen. The king agreed and set out with his entourage to the realm. But when he asked his wife to accompany him, she declined. She was sure the dwarfs would have a poor opinion of her. Snow White would have socialized with them. She would govern the land until his return, and whispered to him that she hasn't heard how their daughter died. And while not pointing fingers, one or all the dwarfs could be responsible, and could be spinning lies to save their necks. Yes, most stories have it that a prince will arrive, but a true love kiss will not cure in half of the stories, making in fact the prince redundant. So, yes, being the father is most of it has been on my own. The king and his guards approached the dwarfs and introduced himself as the girl's father, and that he came to bring her home for her burial. He continued to protect his wife with his words, and would forgive any crime they could have committed, as long as they relinquished her body. And so the dwarfs did, but not until they made the king promise they could attend her funeral. The dwarfs lifted Snow White on the carriage and took with them a little box as well. The trip to the kingdom was silent and unpleasant. The king, the entourage, and the dwarfs all were struck grieving, and as the carriage travelled on less travelled ground, the piece of fruit stuck in Snow White's throat dislodged, and thus Snow White was alive and well, and hugged her father that she hasn't seen in years, and told him what the hunter had told her. One could just imagine the look on the queen's face as both the king and Snow White entered the throne room, followed by the seven dwarfs. They pressed their thanks to the queen, and that they were a bit too gullible to accept the words of a girl as fact. As an apology, they gave the box to the queen. Within it was a pair of shoes, just fancy enough for a banquet or a ball. And thus, when the king invited all the royals to the castle to celebrate the prince's return, the queen put on the shoes for a dance and busted into flames. Burning, the queen's beauty was fleeting, and then gone. After that, the queen's crimes were exposed, and no one showed up for a burial in an unmarked grave, except for seven dwarfs. Snow White later married to a kind prince, while the king never remarried for a second time. Next into Dwarf's Throat Fantasy, another version on Snow White.